what I wanted to talk with you guys about, for those of us who have big hearts and are big softies, it's often tied very closely in with codependency, our understanding of our role. For example, it happens very naturally to parents because you're a parent. And so you're naturally going to do some of this with your children. Some of you are caregivers for a parent or a family member. It's naturally going to happen a little bit. And then there are points at which taking care of other people, it crosses over into the unhealthy zone. And it crosses over into this unhealthy zone in an unhealthy way for that other person. And in many ways it can handicap that other person, and it becomes a cyclical problem. They can't do something, so we do it for them, and because we do it for them, they still haven't learned how to do it, and it just becomes that ongoing cycle of them needing you to do that task or that thing for them. But it's also unhealthy for us. And the unhealthy piece, that way that you're fueling your own fire of unhealthy thinking patterns, is that you are fulfilling a role and you're getting something out of that. And that's what we call codependency, a sense of esteem in that I am worthy and I am worth being loved if and when I am acting for someone else in this way. And the alternative to that is, and it's like, well, that's not a bad thing to care for someone else, right? But the alternative to that is, at what point are you, one, sacrificing your own needs, and two, at what point is your identity caught up in that role that you're playing for that other person? Being that when you're not playing that caretaking role, and when you're not doing that activity, you identify as not a good person, or you don't feel good about yourself, or you don't feel worthy of love, because you haven't done anything that would be deserving of love. So that's where the codependency comes from, is that sense that you are not lovable and worthy and good enough when you're not acting in that way. So it's those two pieces that have to be broken: our ability to set boundaries with someone else, and our ability to self-care and love ourselves even when we're not behaving in a way that we think is expected of us. I'm going to ask a few questions that will help you kind of ignite whether or not you're enabling someone in your life. And then we'll backtrack into how that is impacting your psychology and your own neuroses and some of that stuff that's going on. So, do you ever ignore what you would consider unacceptable behavior from someone else? So, do you often have someone flip out on you? For example, that's one of my weaknesses. I had someone just completely flip out on me the other day, and I just didn't say anything. I didn't set a boundary. I didn't walk away. I just let them. Now, in some circumstances, that's an okay thing. Where it's not an okay thing is feeling like I don't have an alternative. Do you find yourself resenting responsibilities you take on? Anybody know that? Where I'm like, why in the world did I just volunteer myself for that? Do you consistently put your own needs and desires aside in order to help someone else? Do you ever feel fearful that if you do not do something, it's going to cause a blow up? They're going to get angry, so you act in order to prevent or to placate someone. Like, oh, they're going to get so mad if. Have you ever found yourself saying that? Do you ever have trouble expressing your own emotions openly? Like in the moment, saying how you really feel. You lock lips. You're just like, okay, you'll hear someone else out, but for whatever reason you don't feel like you'd be heard, so you think, oh, I'm not going to take the time. Do you ever lie to cover for someone else's mistakes? Have you ever tried to cover for someone? Do you consistently assign blame for problems to other people rather than the one who's really responsible? We call that projecting. When you go through these questions and we process some of these things together, what's going to happen? In your brain, your neurology is always taking in information about your environment and adapting. What's going to happen on accident is things are going to come up and you're going to handle them naturally, just a little differently than you did before, because you have new insight. And it's not even that you're going to think about it and say, ooh, I want to do this differently, even though some of that will happen. Sometimes you're just going to accidentally make adjustments, and you're going to look back and realize, wow, I handled that really well. Or wow, I handled that differently. Or I finally had the courage to say something where I would have never said something before. You're just going to do it. And then you're going to look back, sometimes you're going to be like, I did it again. And that's okay too, because you're catching yourself. What happened in the past is you were doing a lot of stuff without any awareness of doing it. And then you're just experiencing the consequences of it, and you don't know what happened to get you there. So when you're catching yourself, that's good. And when you just do it naturally, that's also great. But you don't have to force yourself into, every time she calls, I'm going to say, don't worry about that. Just trust that you're going to take all of this in, and you're going to be learning, and you're going to be picking it up. So one thing that I often encourage people when they're in a stressful emotional situation, for us codependents, our instinct is to want to jump in. And sometimes what happens is the people who we enable, they do it in very subtle ways. And so, for example, one of my clients, her son doesn't ever ask for anything, but he presents the problem. It's like, I am stranded out in the middle of this street in LA, and I don't know what to do, and I'm super stressed, and I'm afraid like someone's gonna, like, it's getting really dangerous around here, and I'm freaking out. So he presents the problem. And so, as you can imagine, anyone who loves him is going to immediately respond in the same manner of panic and, oh my gosh, what can I do? And I can get an Uber, or maybe I could drive to you. Are you close to a telephone so you can call so-and-so? Anything like that. So what happens is sometimes enablers put us in a position to solve their problems by simply presenting the problem and expressing the emotion. And so one of our jobs is to practice sitting in discomfort with people without solving their problems. And I'll tell you when that's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. But if you have an infant, for the most part, if they need something, your job is to provide, okay? If you have a child, feeding them at the appropriate times, making sure that they get an education, that they have a roof over their head, and that they're safe. All of those things they need for survival. Do they need an iPad? Do they need these cool shoes? Do they need to go to the movies with their friends? Obviously, they don't need to be isolated, but do they need to go to the movies with their friends this Thursday? No, those are privileges. So anytime, just to separate those things. So if you find yourself trying to solve their problems or their need and make them happy instead of doing what's in their best interest, that's enabling. And with an adult, for the most part, unless you're the conservator, you are not responsible for someone's happiness. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is just sit there with them while they're in that state of discomfort. That being there is just as powerful, if not more powerful. Because what you're doing is, instead of solving their problem, when you try to solve someone's problem, you're also validating that you think they can't do it, that they can't solve it on their own. So sitting there with them shows them, one, you really care about them, and them not being in the perfect state of mind doesn't scare you away, that you still want to be there with them and for them. And then the second piece is you're showing them, hey, I don't know what the answer is, but I'll hang here with you, and I have faith that you will figure it out. I do believe you'll be able to figure this out and get yourself out of this. And that switches from enabling to empowering them.